that video call between President Biden and President Xi of China. Joining me live from Washington is Arise U.S. correspondent Eric Ham. Good to talk with you, Eric. Are you getting a full steer on what the two leaders talked about?
Well, Charles, surprisingly, we haven't gotten anything from the White House in terms of what took place in the call. We have heard from Chinese state media about what Xi Jinping talked to President Biden about. But on this side of the aisle, we haven't heard actually anything from the White House. All we know at this point is that the call lasted for nearly 2 hours. It took place in the Situation Room inside the White House. And as we know from Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary yesterday, we know that there were a wide range of issues that were to be addressed in this meeting today. Of course, we know top of topics was, of course, the issue of Russia and Ukraine and China's alignment with Russia. Now, we know that President Biden was going to warn or speak very directly with President Xi about his alignment with Russia and Vladimir Putin specifically. In addition to that, we also know that there would be discussions about what might be the consequences if, in fact, China decides to actually provide military or economic aid to Russia. But as far as the details of the readout, we have not heard anything. Now, let me just put my analysis hat on and just tell you what I think has been playing out. The White House has been very, very sensitive about discussions surrounding China. They have been very tight-lipped. They've been very prickly when asking questions about China. In fact, just a week ago, there was a background call before the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, traveled to Rome, where he would meet with his counterpart from the People's Republic of China. And that was a very testy call. It was a very short call, something that's not the norm of what we see from these background phone calls when we have senior administration officials. And so I'm not sure what's actually driving what's going on in the White House, but all my sense is they are very sensitive when discussing China and talking about things around China. And I think they're being more tight-lipped than usual. Of course, the driver of this is anyone's guess.
So one thing is pretty clear, though, from what you've said, Eric, and that is that this wasn't just another phone call in that ongoing flurry of diplomacy over Ukraine, and that the White House is watching with increasing alarm to see whether China will give military support to Russia.
Yeah, that's right. And again, and also, too, Charles, it's so important because we don't know and we don't get a sense of what the response will be from the United States or from Europe. Now, here's something interesting. We know yesterday that there were 3 members of Baltic states, one from Latvia, 3 members of parliament from 3 different Baltic states that testified before the U.S. Congressional Helsinki Commission. This is also the Security and Cooperation Committee, Commission on Europe. And what one of the witnesses said was, China wants to be the dominant power by 2050 in the world. And she stated specifically that Europe will not allow China to be the dominant power. And so clearly what we are seeing here is this is not just an issue of China and the United States, although these are the 2 world's largest economies, so it's mostly couched as that. But clearly Europe has something to say about that. And given where things stand right now, particularly with Russia's weak state, Europe is actually going to start speaking in a much larger and a much more aggressive tone, especially when it comes to China. And so that is something that is also playing out, even though, of course, we're looking at this conversation that took place between President Biden and President Xi today. Clearly, this is going to be an issue of the West versus the rest. And right now, I think China is recognizing that the West is showing a far more unified front than they had hoped or imagined, given before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia took place.
And Eric, is there any talk at all in Washington? I know you're very well connected amongst sort of diplomatic and expert circles there. Is there any talk at all about sanctioning China itself because of its support for Russia, or if it deepens its support for Russia?
Again, Charles, that's a very interesting question. And I think that's why we see so much of a defensive posture from the White House, because the central question for all of us in those press briefings are, what is the White House prepared to do if, in fact, they learn definitively that China is providing military and or economic aid to Russia? And that is where we have not gotten an answer. But not only that, Charles, when we just speak in general terms about the China-Russia alignment, what we have gotten is pushback or a defensive tone from the White House about that relationship. And so it's something that clearly is, I think, something that it makes the White House uncomfortable, even though these are clear lines of communication that the White House wants to keep open with China. How and what the White House's response will be is anyone's guess at this point. But what we do know is when it's discussed, the White House gets very, very uncomfortable.
And Eric, we already know that when it comes to sanctions, I mean, Beijing has made it clear that they don't agree with sanctions and they're not going to change their economic relations at all with Russia. I mean, that must put a spanner in the works for Washington.
Well, what we're seeing, if you look at what's taking place, the United States continues to ramp up its punitive measures on Russia. I mean, just yesterday, the House of Representatives passed legislation that suspends normalized relations with Russia and Belarus. We expect the Senate to pass it at some point over the coming weeks. In addition to that, Charles, what we continue to see is there's a squeeze going on Russia, even as China attempts to at least publicly double down on its support for Russia. So even though China continues to make it known where it stands, that is not in any way changing the calculus of how the West continues to respond to Russia. In fact, we just learned a few hours ago that Poland is actually going to officially submit that NATO send a peacekeeping mission into Ukraine, which of course could be even more provocative than those fighter jets that Ukraine was asking for.
Very interesting indeed. Eric, thank you very much indeed. Eric Ham, Arise US correspondent, talking to me there from Washington.